There's a number of things I want to encompass in this video, so bear with me. Um, Anyone who's followed my channel for a while will know that one subject I've got pretty strong views on is crime. And there's a particular kind of crime that really bothers me, which is the sort of crime that really impacts people's quality of life. I'm not necessarily talking about the most evil crimes like child murder and serial killers and that sort of thing, but the sort of crime that is gradual and really wears people down. So, for example, people being plagued over and over and over again um, by yobs. It's by the way, just for my international audience, yob is a British term. It basically means a very selfish person who just doesn't care about other people. Um, someone who just thinks they could do whatever they want. Um, there's equivalent pejoratives around the world, but British viewers will know what I mean. It's closely associated with, for example, football hooliganism and, as we would say, chav culture. Um, I think the word yob predates the word chav. Um, and they're pejoratives. They're not meant to be endearing terms. Uh, but I'm not politically correct about it. I freely say the word. I don't agree with this idea that we need to describe the people who um, plague our lives of crime in nice ways. I'm not interested in this idea of saying, oh, they're misunderstood young people or something like that. A yob is a yob, and I call them that. Um, but with the lockdown, some kinds of crime have probably been on in the decline. Other kinds of crime haven't really gone away, and one of them is our Yob culture. I mean, with the regulations, people are obviously more restricted in what they do, and there will be certain kinds of criminals that take advantage of this. I mean, in my street recently, one of my neighbours, I live in quite a safe area, so I don't feel any physical threat living in this area. But I know that we've had opportunities coming through at night time trying to break into gardens here of late. My neighbour, we have a residents association. She lives at the end, so her house is on the junction of the road and the street, and she had her children's slide stolen recently. So we've been trying to offer support. She's been in liaison with police and so on, and yeah, it's been a problem that's ongoing. But when I hear these cases of people deliberately spitting in the faces of emergency personnel, whether it be the police or ambulance workers or nurses, I'm naturally disgusted by that. I think most reasonable people would be. And there was a very sad and very disgraceful case in London a few days ago. A woman who worked on the London Underground was spat at by a man who claimed he had COVID-19 and she died. And this generated a lot of media attention. Even the Prime Minister spoke out about it. Now, I think spitting in someone's face at any time is a disgusting thing to do, but in the context of a pandemic, where we know for a fact that it is spread by human to human contact, I think for someone to openly say they have COVID-19 and to spit in someone's face, at the very least, that should be treated as common assault. At the very least. There was a woman in Kent who done this and she said she could face a year in jail. I would say that's quite lenient because let's say someone actually did have the virus and they done this. To me, that is no different than someone who has HIV/AIDS deliberately going around and sleeping with people, knowing that they've got it. I'd even go so far as to say it's tantamount to manslaughter. I'd be tempted to say tantamount to murder, but that's the legal grey area. But I do think there need to be harsh consequences for these people because in any circumstances it's bad. But in this context, even if they don't have it, the anxiety that they would cause to their victim would be profound. It doesn't matter if they wipe it off immediately afterwards. It's the risk is there. The way viruses spread, the risk is very high. And we know that people have died from this, not just in this country, in other countries as well. I think I mentioned in a previous video about the Detroit bus driver who was spat at and he died a week later. So, how does this tie into our Yob culture? Well, the sort of people who are doing this are the sort of people who would do it before the pandemic. These are people who just have no regard for fellow citizens whatsoever. I've encountered them. I think there should be very strong deterrents for this. I'm not talking about, you know, throw them away. I mean, lock them up and throw away the key. But I do think it should definitely be a custodial sentence because this is far worse than common assault. It could be potentially deadly if they actually do have the virus. And if they have the virus, then they should be kept in some form of solitary confinement. Give them exercise, give them food, but really, there needs to be a strong deterrent for this because this is happening more and more. And no police officer or ambulance worker or nurse or doctor should have to put up with that. Or shopkeeper or bus driver or anyone else. No one should have to put up with it, regardless of what the job is. But I just mentioned those particular professions because they're the people who are more likely to be facing it because they're essential workers. Um, but this gets into a wider cultural problem. Before the pandemic, I've always felt that, I'll be quite honest, I have a bit of anxiety about crime because of my previous experience. But look at public transport. Um, you get groups of people, and sometimes it's stag parties, sometimes it's hen parties, sometimes it's individuals, and they get absolutely wasted, drunk out of their minds. They get onto public transport, whether it be a bus or a train, and they just take it over. And they shout loud, they throw the trash everywhere, the rubbish everywhere. I shouldn't Americanize my words, but yeah. They throw the rubbish everywhere. I remember I was on a train from Carlisle to Dumfries. That particular route seems to attract this problem. And there was some drunks got on. They had takeaway meals. I went to use the toilet when I came back. One of them had actually left the remnants of this meal on the seat beside me. Now, I couldn't point fingers because it was a fairly large group. I couldn't point to which individual done it. And the thing is, you have to be careful because if you remonstrate, if you make an issue of it, drunk people are very unpredictable. You don't know if they're going to get violent or lash out. So I think it's disgusting. I think there needs to be a situation if someone is drunk, they're refused entry onto any train or bus, period. Just refused to get on, whatever the circumstances. I don't care if they're celebrating because the rest of us shouldn't have to put up with that. Now, obviously, at the moment, we're in lockdown. There's great limitations on transport anyway. I must admit, I'm a little bit concerned that when everything goes back to normal, these sort of people are going to kind of go over the top in their celebrations or their. And in a way, it's understandable. Most people will probably want to relax to some extent. I will. Totally understandable. But it's a bit like, I don't know, where you have. I won't even make analogies because I can't think of one off the top of my head. But I'm a little bit concerned that if we ease the restrictions too fast, then some people are going to let it get to their head and they'll just go over the top and they'll, be idiots. It's a very unpleasant thing when you're on a train, it's late at night, you've traveled, it's a long journey. I'm not talking about like local, it's bad enough on a sort of local transit system, such as we have here in the northeast of England, Tyne Metro. Bad enough putting up with drunks on that. But when you're on a national railway and it's several hours journey and you're putting up with drunks, I really think, I mean, the British Transport Police do great work, but they can't be everywhere at the same time. So I really think that there needs to be more policing at stations, and people who are clearly inebriated just should be simply refused. I mean, there's this whole thing about, oh, it's just lavish banter. Well, that's all very well, but maybe the rest of society doesn't want to put up with your banter. They don't want to hear football supporters are among the most selfish people around. I'm not saying they're all like that, but I don't care if your team has won. Maybe the rest of the train don't want to put up with your loud singing for the whole journey. I just think it's extremely selfish because for them it's just high spirits. I'm not a Puritan. I'm not expecting people to be completely monk-like, but I do think if you're sharing a carriage with other people and you're throwing your weight around, it's disgusting. And I know I'm not the only person who thinks this way. I mean, I must be honest, it causes me some degree of anxiety because I think, well, okay, is it just annoying or are they actually going to, what if they start throwing stuff around? What if they start, because it's always a potential. So some people might say I'm too sensitive, but I know how these people think. I put up with them. I've experienced this in the past, and I know what sort of things people are capable of. Put simply, have some consideration for other people. And I really think we need a cultural change in this country. I really hope that this lockdown maybe gets some of these people to calm down a little bit and maybe reflect on their lives, maybe reflect on the way they treat other people. Because it's all very well having high spirits and just having a good laugh with your mates. That's fine. We don't live in a dictatorship. You can do that, but just do it within reason. If you're on a long train journey, don't spend the entire journey shouting and singing at the top of your lungs when it's late at night and other people are either trying to sleep or, keeping themselves to themselves. Have you considered maybe they don't want to put up with your noise? Maybe they want to rest. Maybe they've had a long day. It's just a selfish mentality that these people have. And the thing is, often individually, they're not that bad, but it's just rather weak sheep mentality. Like it's kind of the herd mentality. They're in a group, so oh well, my buddies are doing it, so I'll just do it as well. I've no respect for it. I really think it's a problem. And it's one thing people are just singing. That's not the worst thing. I can just about put up on that. But the thing is that they're not content with doing that. No, no, no. They'll start throwing the rubbish around, right? Um, and then someone has to clean up after them. They'll use the toilets on the train, and they'll, to put it bluntly, they'll piss everywhere. Someone has to clean up after them. People need to use it after them. It's just, I have no respect for selfish people. And that is what comes to the heart of Yob culture, selfishness. So I'm not a Puritan, I'm not a killjoy. I like to have a drink as much as the next man. Absolutely. And if someone's celebrating, they're getting married or whatever, of course you're going to celebrate. I really do get that. But all I'm saying is people should be reasonable and consider other people. And as for where I really, really draw a line is on flights. When I read these reports of people who get on the flights and get drunk and make demands. And here's the thing, it's not, a class thing because very often the people who are doing this are middle class jobs. Very often they are professional people. I've heard of lawyers getting onto planes and getting drunk and making demands. So they're educated people, but they're entitled people. So that's the thing about Yob culture. We shouldn't just assume it's a working class thing. In fact, I think that's quite snobby because this is a thing about Britain's job culture. It truly crosses class boundaries. I've seen upper class jobs and I've seen working class jobs, and they're as bad as each other. It's a real problem in this country. I think in other parts of Europe, people are more relaxed. I'm not saying that Germany or the Netherlands or other countries don't have crime. Of course they do. And the crime statistics, for example, for France is about the same as the UK. Um, but this particular kind of attitude, I think, is an almost uniquely British problem. I'm not going to say it's completely unique to this country because you get, selfish people everywhere, but I do think that it's something you see a lot in the UK. And I've traveled quite extensively in my life, and it's something I've seen more in the UK than in other countries. So I really would like to see a major cultural change. First, I think we're far too tolerant of it. I think far too many people just put up with it because they know that not much is going to happen. I respect the British Transport Police. I think they do a difficult job and I think they do the best they can. But I think there needs to be more personnel. I think too often stations, there's no one in sight when there are problems. So when all of this lockdown ends, I think there's a lot of things that need to be looked at. We can be a better society. But this all comes down to quality of life. When you have other people who are just doing what they want, it actually impacts quality of life. It really does. And when you look at these international rankings, like quality of life index, it isn't just about how big an economy is. It isn't just about how good a country's healthcare is. Those are important things. But it is also about quality of life. And for me, one very, very critical aspect of that is how safe do people feel. Now, Britain is not a particularly dangerous country. We're not like certain Latin American countries that have skyrocketing homicide rates. For example, Honduras or El Salvador. We actually have quite a low homicide rate, but we do have a problem in other areas, like what I've been speaking about. And this also extends to places where, when I hear of young offenders, when I hear of teenagers, for example, a young father has remonstrated with them to stop throwing stones at his house, and then they beat him to within an inch of his life, and they're given a tap on the wrist. It absolutely infuriates. It scares me, to be quite honest. It scares me that they could be so depraved in their mindset that they would do that to a total stranger. But also, it infuriates me that the consequences are so pathetically lenient. I've never made a secret of the fact I am pretty hard line when it comes to that sort of crime. Um, Now, the Sentencing Council of England and Wales, their official policy on young offenders is rehabilitation first, because their logic is, oh, let's rehabilitate them before they commit crime. But that's pretty meaningless when the crime has already been committed. I recently made that video about the man in Gosport, Hampshire, who actually forced his son to go back to the ASDA where he had abused staff. And a lot of people were praising that father. That's the sort of mentality that we need to see more. And I know that makes me sound old fashioned, but really, I think the approach to young offenders in this country in recent years has been far, far too passive and lenient. The public don't accept it, but the legal establishment enables it because they don't really provide serious consequences. If you are a 15-year-old and you plague your neighbours, you throw stones at their house, you assault them in the street, you're part of a gang, you verbally abuse strangers, then the most you're going to get from a judge is to be put on some sort of referral. You'll be put on to some sort of rehabilitation program where you need to attend sort of courses about respect. Maybe you'll do a bit of community service. But the only way you'll get a custodial sentence is if you basically murder someone. I think that's pathetic. I think there needs to be a much, much harder approach early on. Actually, to me, that's a much better rehabilitation than the softly, softly approach that's currently used. It just doesn't work because young offenders laugh at it, literally. So there needs to be an approach of really, really making people understand that there are real consequences for their actions, real consequences. And by the way, this is not, oh, throw them in prison and, just throw away the keys. That's not what I'm saying. There should be, of course, an education aspect to it, but it needs to be hard line. Absolutely, it needs to be hard line. So many cases in this country of people being murdered by yobs. And it comes from this depraved mindset of sheer selfishness. And by the way, I'm not being overly cynical about the British people. I think the British people are great. I think most British people are generous, open-minded. We've seen this community spirit we've got for our carers. I think the British people are profoundly generous. I mean, the response to Captain Tom's um, work has been fantastic. So there is a really good side to the British people. But this Yob culture, I really, really think that there needs to be a serious social revolution of sorts. And I think there's various things we can do. I think there needs to be a lot more pressure put on the likes of the Sentencing Council of England and Wales. Too lenient. They're too, despite what they claim, they do not give reassurance to victims of crime. At least not the sort of crime I've been speaking about. Um, and I think that there is issues around personnel numbers, and I think the Tories have a lot to answer for in that regard. For example, there's too many train stations at night time when people are commuting are empty. There's no one in sight when you need help. So I think there's a lot more can be done. As for these people who are spitting in the face of medical personnel and saying they've got COVID-19, that should be a mandatory custodial sentence. Mandatory.